Hey yo, in this video I'm going to go over my live music production setup in Ableton Live to hopefully help inspire you if you're looking to do the same. So we're going to dive into all of the stuff that's going on in this session. So let's dive in. Hey yo, it's Alex from Mind Music, and as always with this channel, it's my mission to help yourself, the artist, produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. And in this video, I wanted to go over the kind of live template that I have for live music production. So this is something that I've been getting into a lot lately, where instead of producing in session view or instead of recording riffs into arrangement view, I kind of have a setup that's this intuitive flow of controlling many tracks and effects and all sorts of stuff so that I can actually create stuff live on the spot and have a lot of flexibility to discover and play with interesting, cool sounds. So I thought I would just go over what I have going on in my setup here, as I'm just about to actually go in here and tweak a bunch of stuff and change it up. But this is a really cool one that I have so far, and hopefully it'll inspire you to figure something out for yourself of this nature if you're interested in doing something similar to this. Okay, so let's dive straight in to what's going on. So I'm using Line 6 Helix that's actually at my feet for my guitar tones, as well as some other MIDI controlling stuff. I have a Push 2 right here, and I have an APC40, and these three controllers kind of make up the crux of how I control Ableton and interface with it. Okay, so first and foremost, I have 4 different tracks with rhythm, bass, melody, and then guitar would be the 4th track. So if I select track 5, you'll notice that the Push 2 automatically shows me the drum kit. And if I play this, this is the drum kit sound that I have. It's kind of like this realistic drum sound. Right, all sorts of cool, fun stuff. And yeah, so that's basically what I got going on here for the rhythm. And I can change these sounds out, but this is kind of where I start from all the time. So let's move on to this next track, which is the bass sound. So I have this cool, like, funky bass sound going on. All right, and then if we keep moving on, track 7 is a melody. So this is I'm using Equator 2 for both the bass and the melody sound. This is a nice spacey Rhodes sound, really nice sound. Super vibey. And then finally I have my guitar here. So if I arm this and I pick up my guitar, I got this alien looking guitar that has no headstock. This thing's pretty wild. And if I play this, we got a guitar sound coming out. This right now is just DI. I haven't put in a tone or anything right now. And one fun fact about this is that I have control of the effects down here at my feet. Okay, and I have these super long delays that are actually in sync with Ableton. So if I hop over to the preferences, and if we go to MIDI, so let's find that, you can actually select sync for any MIDI controller you have that you want it to receive clock data from Ableton, so long that it's connected to Ableton via USB or to your interface with the MIDI cable. As long as you hit sync, Ableton will send out clock data to that MIDI controller so that it is synced. So I have the Helix here. So if we go to the Helix here, I have sync selected. So that means that whenever I hit play on Ableton, right, if we throw on the metronome, these delays will be in sync. All right, so that is a super handy feature, especially if you're a guitarist or you have any instrument that has built-in effects that you can sync up all the delay times and all the wacky modulation, whatever you're doing to that sound. You can sync it with the main clock of Ableton. And that's a super important thing for my setup here, is that everything is synced to this master clock, and I'm using Ableton as that clock. And if you have a lot of stuff going on, if you're trying to record loops, if you're trying to trigger sequencers, it's important that everything stays in time. So if you're using Ableton for something similar, definitely make sure that the clock setting is all figured out with all of your devices. So fortunately enough for me, both the APC40 and the Push 2 automatically sync with the main clock of Ableton, so that makes it easy. So that makes it easy to sync up both these controllers as well as the Helix foot controller. All right. So while we're talking about foot controllers, one special thing I did here is I've actually mapped navigation buttons on my foot controller. Okay. So on my Line 6 Helix, I can navigate up, down, left, and right. So you'll notice that if I hit down, I go down a clip slot. If I hit up, I go up a clip slot, and I can also go left and right. Okay, usually I do this while playing. Okay, let's turn off the metronome. So yeah, I can navigate around Ableton with my feet, which is super important when you're playing guitar, because I don't have my hands free all the time, but I have my feet free, and I'm super used to hitting pedals when playing live. So yeah, I just thought that was super powerful. And just one really powerful thing is like I can go left, and now I'm playing a drum kit. Right, and then you go right, and then I'm moving to the bass. All from my feet. If I want to go and play a melody, do it again. Go back to the bass. Oh, I went twice. Right, so that is super powerful. And yeah, if you have a foot pedal or any kind of MIDI foot controller, if you play guitar or if you play bass, or if you have if you're a horn player or if you're a vocalist, it can be nice to have control at your feet as well. Same goes for if you're playing piano and you want to have passages where you're playing with both hands. Well, you still have both feet available, so you could be switching sounds with your feet while still having two hands, stuff like that. So yeah, that's another huge feature of what I have set up here. And yeah, if we continue to move along, let's actually look at a few of the controls that I've mapped with these controllers. Okay, so aside from selecting tracks and changing instruments, all that fun stuff, I actually have some global control set up with this return track. Okay, so you'll notice that these 4 tracks, rhythm, bass, melody, and guitar, are set to being sends only. Okay, and what this means is that the output of those tracks is only being sent out the sends. Okay, so there's no output coming out, the normal output of the track. It's only being fed through the sends. And the reason for this is you can create buses really easy using sends. Okay, so right now everything is being sent to A. So everything is being sent to this Tornado return track before then going to the master. And the reason for this is, let's say you want a global control over all your tracks. Well, now you can just throw an effect like I have here, Tornado, on this return track, and it's going to affect every single track fully mixed into that bus, since they're only being outputted through that bus. If you don't put sends only, then they'll be part of the signal that's going directly to the master, as well as the other part of the signal going to the return track. Okay, so I wanted it to affect the whole mix of these tracks. Let's just close this group. We'll get into that later. Yeah, and the advantage of doing it this way is that, let's say you wanted the effects to just affect the rhythm and the bass. Then you could literally just send these 2 tracks to send B, turn them off from send A, and then maybe just disable this reverb. So now this would be acting as kind of a dry return track. So now if I spin any effects on here, it will only affect the rhythm and the bass, so the drum kit and the bass sound, if I have it set up this way. Okay, so let's look at what's actually set up on this effect. And I have Tornado here, which is a great effect that has a bunch of effects built in. And what I've done with Tornado is, with these 8 knobs on the APC40, if you select device lock, meaning you're locking these 8 parameters to a specific device, you can control whatever you want regardless where you are in your set. Okay, so right now I have these 8 knobs mapped to these 8 effects to just play around with on the fly as I'm jamming out ideas and stuff. Okay, so yeah, the power of this is I could be over here with my drum sound, and I could be adding effects, right? That's a weird stereo pan thing, right? All these different effects. All sorts of fun stuff. All these fun effects. And it's especially fun once you have loops going, which we'll show you later. So yeah, just have hands-on control on some kind of master bus effects. Super handy. So definitely play around with that if it inspires you for your own setup. And yeah, let's keep moving on. So I'm just going to turn these back to all being on send A for now. All right, so that takes care of that. And another thing I've done is on the top row of this APC40, there is a user mode where in normal mode, it'll either be the panning of your track. So this could be like panning left and right, pretty standard, or it could be your sends, right? So you could be controlling your sends from the APC40, but I actually prefer to have it on user mode because it just gives me access to a bunch more mappable knobs, which is useful. And that's actually one of the tweaks I'm going to be doing is I'm going to actually put the APC40 outside the custom script and map everything to certain things that I want to use instead of it following every track. Although that is super useful for what I want to do with this template, I kind of want to have more control. But anyway, for these 8 knobs, I'm in user mode so that these are all mapped out to different things. And one thing to note is if we go back to Tornado, this 8th knob here controls what is called the dictator. And this is pretty cool because if we go here, it shows you that it kind of scrolls through different amounts of every effect at once with one big knob. So if you really want to mess up your track and do all sorts of crazy stuff, you can do so with that dictator thing. Okay, so right now it's back to 0. Yeah, and let's actually talk about the other huge part of this setup. Okay, so right now we went over the rhythm, bass, melody, and guitar tracks. That's pretty straightforward. We talked about Tornado. And we've got some foot control with the Line 6 Helix down there. That's also my guitar tone. But if we go to this control group, I'm going to show you what I got going on. Okay, so I have, again, rhythm, bass, and melody once again with the same exact instruments. Okay, so this rhythm track, again, has drums on it. This bass sound, I think, is the same as the other bass track. And this melody is the same as the other melody track. And you might be asking yourself, well, like, why? What's the point of having this? And a huge part of what I've been playing around with is these sequencers. So I'm using all these different really cool, what are called MIDI sequencers that generate MIDI data by themselves. Okay, so I just set parameters and then it starts just generating and spitting out notes by itself. And yeah, Novel Music makes some really great stuff. Definitely check them out if you're interested in that kind of thing. And they are Max for Live devices that most importantly map to Push 2. So that if I select the track with one of these sequencers on it, Push 2 has a custom mapping script that just makes it more hands-on control, because I don't want to be having to go in here, for example, and click in this little device and changing things and affecting stuff. I would much rather see it all in front of me like it is right here, and play with my hands and get in the mode and not really get sidetracked by tedious mouse work and just really just feel it out. So that's a huge part of what I wanted. I wanted to have both sequencers available to me as well as hands-on control for tracks like we just went over earlier. Like if I want to play drum sound, easy as that. If I want to play a bass sound, awesome. But now let's say, I don't know, I'm not inspired or I just want to play around with sequencers. We can go over to track 2 and Ableton pops up this custom script for what is called Polymath, which is a sequencer. And this is pretty much my main sequencer. This is feeding both that melody and bass track that we saw over here in the control group. So what's really powerful about these Novel Music devices is that they have their own internal MIDI routing, which I can't express how amazing that is. So basically what's happening is each of these tracks you'll see has a different letter that it is outputting to. Okay, so what's happening is this thing is sending out different MIDI data depending on what I program in through all 4 of these tracks to different numbers. You see, I'm only using actually track 1 and 2. Track 3 and 4 I'm not even using right now, but track 1 is going to, what is that, E? Yeah, E, and this is going to F. So if we go over to this track, okay, so let's go to the bass, you'll notice that we have a hub device, and this is another novel music device, which is amazing. And what this is doing is bypassing Ableton's kind of internal MIDI routing and using a Max for Live device to actually route around the MIDI in a much easier way. So all that this device is doing is receiving MIDI on channel E. So any novel music device that is sending out MIDI data on channel E is being sent to this track. So if you remember track 1 over here, if we go here, track 1 is sending out on channel E. So that means that this MIDI data on track 1 of Polymath is being sent to this bass MIDI track over here, okay? And this is receiving the MIDI. So once I figured that out, I was like, oh, sweet, this is awesome. But I was having trouble being able to record that MIDI because, yeah, it's cool to have sequencers going and shooting out random stuff, but it would be even cooler if you could record that and then edit it and change it afterwards. If you have some magic moments that happen, you have just maximum flexibility of using both the MIDI generated, the sequencer stuff, but then also editing it later if you want to change stuff up. And I couldn't actually do that directly from this device. So that's why I have this crazy routing going on. I couldn't actually record the MIDI of all of the crazy stuff that was coming out of here. So what I'm doing is I'm sending MIDI out of here, out of track 1 into this bass track. So this is receiving MIDI on channel E once again. And the output of this track is sending MIDI to this bass track that has the same bass instrument that I'm working with over here. Right? It's the same bass sound that I have in this track, but just loaded here just so that that sequencer can send MIDI and record it to this track. So you'll notice that the input of these 3 tracks are set to in because they are all receiving MIDI data from sequencers just like we saw with this bass track, okay? So it's the same principle for all 3 of these tracks. And the reason why we have monitor to in is because we want to hear what is being fed to this track. And we're actually going to record that as we move forward. And I show you how I kind of work with this system. So that's why they're all record armed and they're all set to in, okay? So if we go back to Polymath, Polymath is a super powerful sequencer where you can pencil in notes. So I can actually change these notes from here if I wanted. So let's say we just do something simple and move these notes around. And this is a bass instrument, so I'm keeping it in mono. Okay. All right, so a few settings that I have for this track, which remember is basically the bass track for the sequencer. I have it offset to be -24 because I want the MIDI that I program into here to be in the lower registers, okay? I don't want it to interface with all the high melodies and stuff. I want it to hold the low end, so that's why this offset is set here. And one super powerful thing that I love about all this is if I go to all tracks here, you can actually select the scale that all of this MIDI will conform to. Okay, so you don't have to worry about playing in a certain scale. You just actually have fun placing notes everywhere, and then you listen to what happens and get inspired from there. And then you just know that it's all going to conform to a key. So let's actually go to F and let's choose natural minor. That's a nice one. And you actually have the option to switch back and forth between 2 different scales. So I'll show you that a little later. So let's set it up. So let's go to F harmonic minor. Okay, so we can actually modulate between these 2 scales in real time, which is crazy powerful. Anyway, so if we go back to track 1, we got some data that we've put in. That's super cool. If we go to track 2 now, okay, now track 2, remember, is the exact same thing as the bass, but it's feeding the melody track. Okay, and right now I have nothing kind of set. But another super powerful thing about the Polymath sequencer is that you can set each track to have its own length. So you'll notice that the length of this sequence is 8 steps. Okay, so we have 8 notes before this thing loops around. But if I go to track 2, actually, I think this one's 9. All right, so yeah, the steps of this track is actually 9 steps instead of 8. So this is where the magic of this comes in. We're gonna have a polyrhythm going on. Okay, we're gonna have the bass kind of repeating every 8 steps, and then this melodic pattern will repeat every 9 steps. That might be a little bit crazy, so let's actually move this to 12 because they're both equal divisions within 4 time. So if we have 12 steps, I can actually go in here and pencil in different notes. All right, so let's move here. Maybe let's start with a chord. And this track is set to being polyphonic because it is a melodic track, okay? So let's say we wanted a few chords and maybe a couple run-up notes at the end and see what that sounds like. See, I have no idea what this is going to sound like. I just threw in notes. That's kind of the beauty of this, okay? And then finally, one really awesome thing about this sequencer is that the way that it moves forward and triggers notes is fed by what is called a clock, okay? So it's not simply just moving along all on the same pulse with Ableton. We actually have this other device, which is called chronology, okay? And chronology has, we'll stop playback here, has actually 4 different clocks that are shooting information at the same time based upon Ableton's main clock. Okay, so that might sound crazy, but let me explain it. So we have a main pulse going on. So let's just go ahead and play this with the metronome. Okay, so we have this slow pulse. And you'll notice that each of these 4 clocks are moving at different rates than each other. So this one's moving every second note. Okay, so it's playing 8 notes. Right, every time I'm clapping, you can see that first green thing going down. So the crazy thing about this is this first clock is playing every 8th note, so a division of 2. This is playing a division of 3. This is playing a division of 5. And this is playing a division of 7. Okay, and then the time that each of these clocks are sending out play information, meaning play a note, right, is every white dot versus the empty dot. Okay, so if we look at the example of this one, this first clock, it would be sending information out every 8th note except for this before last 8th note, okay? All right, so we have all of these different clocks that are generating MIDI play on information, sending play a note to that polymath sequencer we just looked at. And the powerful thing about this, again, is it maps to this push to controller where I can just randomize all of these values, change it up and not even know what's going on. And I can pencil in and take out specific notes in these sequences. Notice that as I hit these buttons, certain things turn on and off here. So now we have 4 different clocks sending a myriad of different MIDI on data to then trigger the notes that are in Polymath, okay? So if I go to Polymath, I can actually feed these different tracks different clock data, okay? So that might sound crazy, but if we look at track 1, which is the bass, right now it's being fed by 3 clocks, okay? So you'll see these little C's at the bottom of the screen right over here. I can control that over here, and depending what combination of clocks, it's going to be this weird pulsing combination of different clocks intersecting at the same time, feeding the notes that are happening in this track. So I hope that makes sense. Maybe let me show you an example so it's a little bit more clear. So for now, we're just going to turn on clock 1. So if we look at chronology over here, let's go back over here. So if we look at clock 1, we have every second note. So we're playing 8 notes, and it's going to cycle around this 5 pattern. Okay, so it's going to be playing the first 8th note, and then it's going to skip 2 8th notes, and then it's going to play another 2 8th notes before cycling around, always with an 8th note pulse. Okay, so if we turn this clock on to our bass track, we're going to hear that articulation of timing on this sequence that we've penciled in. Okay, so if I hit play, so another thing I should quickly mention is I've mapped 4 of these user knobs that we were talking about earlier on the APC to control the volume of these tracks over here. Okay, so the return track that is actually receiving MIDI from all of these sequencers, the output of that is being controlled here. So it's always actually generating music and generating notes all the time, but I'm just using these to control when I bring them in and bring them out. So this first one is a drum sequencer, which we haven't looked at yet. And then this one is the bass track, which we are looking at right now. And then this next one is the melody track that I can bring up or down whenever I want. So let's bring up that bass track so we can hear it and play back and listen to what it sounds like, okay? Cool, like pretty straightforward, not bad, but that's just being all generated by the sequencer with that clock. But where this becomes super interesting is when I throw in another clock. Okay, so let's throw in a second clock and listen to what changes about this bass line. So it creates a super interesting rhythmic polyrhythm based on that main clock. And that's why I really love this setup, and you have complete control. So let's actually throw in the melody. So I'm just going to turn up the melody track for the sequencer as well. Let's move over to track 2. And this one is a completely different sequence that's triggering that melody instrument, remember? And we're going to put clock 3 and 4. Okay, so the bass track is 1 and 2, and then this other track is 3 and 4. And let's listen to how this sounds together. All right, so that's a pretty interesting sequence, and I feel that this is actually maybe a little bit slow. So again, we can just turn up the tempo like normal. So let's maybe move up to, I don't know, 108 and listen for that. All right, so the fun thing about this is that with these sequencers, you can literally play around with random clock values, throw in notes, and then bring them up and see what happens. And you know that they're going to conform to that F minor scale that we kind of came up with. So I can start jamming ideas in F minor, and then I can also bring up these sequencers to just inject that kind of chaos factor of not necessarily knowing what's going to happen all the time and just kind of feeding off the music a little bit more. So that's kind of the approach I had behind this. And let's actually look at a couple quick other features of these novel music sequencers because they're so powerful. So let's actually move over to what is called Sweet 16 here. And now these two Sweet 16 sequencers, basically, I won't go into all the details. They're basically just sending out MIDI data that's triggering that drum track. Okay, so it's just a different sequencer than the polymath one. So let's actually turn up the drums and see what's happening with these settings, okay? All right, pretty cool, right? All right, so the other cool thing about all of these sequencers is that as you're messing around and coming up with cool patterns, it might be nice to change them, right? And get different musical outputs, but maybe you don't want to lose something that you have, right? So how do you get around that? And that is where Selfie comes in. And this is yet another novel music Max for Live device that comes in the pack. But what this allows you to do is save instances. Okay, save settings with every single novel music sequencer that is going on. So all of the settings that we have for all of these patterns that are happening, I can save that to what is called a selfie. So if I hold shift and I hit save, now the settings for this kind of musical sequence, this like these 3 parts together are saved here. So if we go back to, let's say some of these sequencers and we change some of the settings, And there we go. We saved it. So let's go back and forth between those two sequences. Okay, so this is the first one. Let's go to sequence 2. Right, pretty cool stuff for sure. So where the magic of this really comes in, of this whole setup, is the fact that when you get ready to jam, you can save these selfies and you can play stuff along with this, all this stuff, okay? And let's actually do that. And what I do is I record both to session view as well as arrangement view, okay? I just record everything. All right, so excuse any pops or clicks. That's part of what I have to revisit, is having way too much stuff on this for it to not clip and trip out. So I've recorded a drum loop. Let's just give it a go. So what I do is just record to arrangement. I start just recording stuff and playing with things and twisting knobs and see what happens. And then not too concerned about the quality. And then afterwards, then you can edit it and change everything to your liking. Okay, so let's do it. And then I could even whip up my guitar, play around, all that great stuff. So that kind of wraps up the general idea. I know this probably went on for a long time, longer than I expected, but I hope this inspires you to play around with a setup that makes sense for you, for your strengths, what you want to do, what you want to play with, your goals, and just make the process of making music and creating ideas a lot more engaging, a lot more fun, a lot more hands-on. And it's a lot easier to jam for 10 minutes and then find the 2 or 3 best ideas. And then if you want, you can chisel out all the mistakes and all the imperfections and produce a song from there. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production and feeling completely just overwhelmed by the process, or if you've been at this for a while but are having trouble finishing projects, or if you just want to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that takes you from creating your first ideas and then selecting the best ones, arranging a song, editing it, mixing, mastering, to finish more songs and get better and better at the whole process as you do it. And it's super handy to have around the studio as a printout. So if you're interested in grabbing that, you can find it in the description below. And that wraps it up for this video. I thought I'd try something different and just share part of what I'm playing around with my setup. So if you have any questions about how to set this stuff up, or if you have any comments or ideas of what you do, I would love to hear what you're up to and what kind of stuff that you have going on for live music production and what your goals are for that. So yeah, drop a comment down below. I'd love to have a conversation about it. So for now, I will love you and leave you, and I will see you in the next video.